You weren't here tonight, remember that. Her voice was quiet, but it landed on me like a weight I didn't know I wanted. I hadn't moved yet, just standing there in the hallway of her apartment building, the scent of rain and warm wood curling around us. Her hand brushed mine as she held the door open, a fleeting touch, but it made my chest tighten anyway. I swallowed. She was taller than I remembered, graceful in a way that wasn't about posture, but the kind of ease that made a room feel smaller, warmer, and somehow hers. Her dark hair fell just past her shoulders, softening the sharpness of her jawline. There was a faint crease between her brows, a trace of thought or perhaps worry, and it made her all the more human. She noticed the little things, I knew that. I had learned it in stolen glances across the courtyard, the way she observed life, and people, with careful attention. I had some work, I muttered, fumbling for something that might sound like an excuse. She didn't laugh or roll her eyes. Instead, she leaned just a fraction closer, and the warmth of her proximity made me acutely aware of my own heartbeat. My hand twitched at my side, and used to standing this close to someone who felt like both a mystery and a gravity I couldn't resist. I could smell the faint hint of jasmine on her skin, mixed with coffee, and the scent curled into something almost tangible, something that made my throat dry. You weren't here, she repeated, softer this time. Not a reproach, not exactly. More like a statement made to the air, to the space between us. Her eyes found mine, steady and knowing, like she could see every thought I hadn't even said aloud yet. And maybe she could. Maybe she always could. I tried to look anywhere else, the rain-streaked sidewalk, the brass mailboxes, but the pull of her gaze held me. Her fingers moved again, just the tips brushing mine as she shifted the stack of keys in her hand. That tiny, accidental intimacy had me on edge, aware of every inch between us, every breath I dared take. I didn't forget, I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended. The words sounded inadequate even to my own ears, but she tilted her head, and I realized she didn't need more. Just the admission, the small acknowledgement that I was here, that I mattered enough to her attention. She let the door click behind her as we stepped inside. The apartment smelled faintly of vanilla and books, dim lighting catching the curve of her cheekbones. My nerves and awareness of her nearness made my fingers itch to reach out again, to see if maybe this time she wouldn't pull away. I thought maybe, I began, then stopped, because I couldn't finish without sounding ridiculous, like a boy who had no right standing in her living room. She caught my hesitation with the slightest quirk of her lips, a faint smile that was both teasing and patient, like she knew the whole truth and was letting me discover it slowly. The silence stretched, charged. I could hear her breathing, even the subtle brush of her sweater against her wrist as she adjusted a lamp. It should have been ordinary, mundane, but between us it was anything but. The space felt smaller, warmer, and my chest ached for something unnamed. And then, just as I leaned forward, daring, curiosity and tension bundled tight in my chest, the soft click of the front door made both of us start. Her eyes widened for a fraction, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. Someone else was coming in. Or maybe it was just the storm outside, echoing too loudly in the quiet room. Either way, the spell between us fractured, just enough to leave me breathless, wondering what would happen next. I found myself watching her even when I thought she wasn't paying attention. The way she tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, the subtle crease in her brow when she read something on her tablet, it made my chest tighten. She noticed, of course. She always noticed. I could feel her gaze, quiet and knowing, on me, like a gentle weight that made it impossible to look away. She moved around the apartment with an ease I envied. My own life felt chaotic in comparison, unfinished assignments, late nights at the cafe, a routine that had somehow dulled my senses. And yet here, in her presence, I felt like I was caught awake for the first time. It was intoxicating, and slightly terrifying. She paused by the counter, reaching for a mug, and our hands brushed. Not the casual brush of strangers, but a deliberate, fleeting contact that left sparks crawling along my skin. I froze, pretending to check my phone, but I could feel her watching me. You work too much, she said softly, her voice carrying that mixture of authority and warmth that always made me a little dizzy. I guess I do, I admitted. Too honest, too fast. She didn't correct me, didn't judge. Just smiled, almost imperceptibly, like she understood everything I couldn't put into words. And maybe I did the same for her. There was something about her that felt both safe and forbidden. Maybe it was the age difference, the nearly 20 years between us. Or maybe it was her subtle vulnerability beneath the confident exterior, the sense that if I leaned too close, I could slip into parts of her life no one else saw. And yet the thought of stepping back seemed impossible. I remembered the stories she'd hinted at, marriages that ended too soon, friends who drifted away, moments lost to choices she didn't regret, but sometimes missed. I didn't know the details, and she never offered more than a careful brush against memory. And yet those small admissions, those pauses in conversation where she almost let herself be honest, made me ache in ways I didn't understand. She shifted closer while pouring her coffee, the heat from her body brushing my arm. My fingers itched to linger on the edge of her sleeve, but I didn't. I was a careful observer, learning every angle, every nuance, like memorizing a language I wasn't sure I had permission to speak. I never thought. She started, then paused, caught in the hesitation that always made her seem so human. I caught my breath, wanting to ask her to finish, to let her words touch the space between us. But I didn't. Instead, I watched her eyes, and they lingered on mine just long enough that I felt seen, truly seen, in a way no one else had managed. And then, almost as if by accident, her hand rested briefly on my shoulder. It was enough to make my pulse skip, enough to make the room shrink around us. I didn't pull away, though I wanted to test if the boundary was real. She didn't either. We stood there, silent, the electricity in the air unspoken but undeniable. The storm outside rumbled softly against the windows, and for a moment, it felt like we existed in a bubble where nothing else mattered, and yet, somehow, the danger, the taboo, the risk, hovered just at the edges. It was intoxicating. It was frightening. And it was impossible to ignore. I was just about to lean closer when my phone buzzed sharply against the counter. The vibration startled me, making my shoulder brush hers more firmly than I intended. She stiffened for a moment, and I caught the flash of that tiny, almost imperceptible hesitation, the subtle warning that neither of us should be letting this get any closer. I glanced down at the screen. A message from my roommate, asking if I'd be home soon. Ordinary enough, but it snapped the moment in half. I looked up, caught her eyes, and saw the same mix of relief and disappointment mirrored there. She stepped back just enough to erase the contact, but the tension lingered, a live wire between us. I should get going soon, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. She nodded, and for a second, her hand lingered on the counter, closer to mine than it needed to be. I could see the way her chest rose slightly with each breath, the subtle tilt of her head that made her hair catch the lamplight. I wanted to reach out again, wanted to close the distance, but a tiny, nagging voice reminded me, the world outside this apartment wouldn't understand. Yet the pull was undeniable. My fingers itched, my pulse raced, every nerve alert to the smallest movement she made. We were suspended in the kind of silence that isn't empty, it hums, almost audible, every heartbeat magnified. I never thought I'd, she began, and stopped, the words dangling like an unfinished bridge. My throat went dry. I leaned in, compelled to finish it with her, but she pulled back slightly, just enough to leave a space that burned between us. Outside, footsteps echoed faintly in the hallway. I froze. My heart thumped against my ribs in a frantic rhythm. She glanced toward the door, then back at me, a question in her eyes. Not words. Just the weight of knowing, of shared risk, of desire held in check. I should check that, I murmured, stepping lightly to the window as if it could shield the moment from intrusion. She moved a fraction closer, her presence filling the small space, until I could feel the warmth of her side brushing against mine. My fingers twitched involuntarily. The electricity between us grew, charged and unspeakable. Our proximity alone was a confession neither dared voice. We spoke almost without speaking. Glances that lingered, breath catching at pauses, subtle shifts in stance that sent messages more powerful than any words. Every movement brought us closer, every silence stretched taut, ready to snap. I caught her hand, almost by accident, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she let it rest there for a heartbeat, long enough for my pulse to spike, for the room to shrink until it existed only for us. And then she leaned just a fraction closer, so that the warmth of her breath brushed my cheek, a whisper of intent I couldn't ignore. My lips twitched toward hers, daring, trembling, and yet neither of us crossed the line. Neither of us broke the invisible barrier that we both knew shouldn't exist, and yet couldn't resist testing. We stayed like that for a moment longer, pulled closer than ever, hearts hammering in unison, the storm outside matching the storm building between us. And for the first time, it felt like we were both teetering on the edge of something that could either destroy everything, or change everything. Her shoulder pressed against mine as we bent over the windowsill, watching the rain trace patterns across the glass. I could feel her warmth seep into me, the soft weight of her body grounding everything else I thought I knew. My fingers itched to linger, to trace the line of her jaw, the curve of her neck, but I held back, for now. I shouldn't. I mean, this is. My words stumbled, trailing off into the electric silence between us. She didn't finish either. Instead, she tilted her head, letting her hair fall forward, and I couldn't resist the pull. I brushed a strand back from her face. Her skin was warm, softer than I had imagined, and the scent of her shampoo, something floral, faint, made my pulse thrum. She shivered, just slightly, and I caught the tiniest hitch in her breath. I don't know why I'm doing this, she murmured, almost to herself. My name hovered unspoken, suspended in the air. And yet I understood, the desire, the hesitation, the thrill of something forbidden. The rain hammered against the window, masking the rapid beat of my heart. I wanted to tell her everything, that I'd been watching, waiting, feeling drawn in ways I couldn't explain. But the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I let my hand linger on her arm, fingers brushing, tracing, memorizing. She leaned closer, imperceptibly, until her cheek nearly touched mine. You're too young, she whispered, a warning, a plea, a confession. Her eyes glimmered with something I couldn't name. Fear? Longing? Guilt? And it twisted something deep inside me. I don't care, I said quietly, almost too fast. My voice sounded raw even to me. My heart was hammering so hard I thought she'd feel it against me. I wanted to close the distance, to feel her lips against mine, to see if the electricity sparking between us could ignite into something undeniable. She froze, eyes wide, and for a moment I thought she might pull away. But she didn't. She stayed, leaning against me, close enough that I could feel the rhythm of her breath, low and uneven, brushing across my ear. Every inch of me screamed forward, every instinct telling me this was the moment. I can't stop thinking about you, I admitted, almost too loudly, words spilling out in a way I couldn't contain. I shouldn't, but I can't. Her lips parted slightly, as if she might answer, as if she might close that final gap between us. My chest ached with the tension, the longing, the impossible gravity of her nearness. My hand lifted to her face almost without thought, brushing her hair behind her ear, and she leaned into it, just enough that the world disappeared. Then, just as my lips trembled forward, just as the space between us vanished, the phone on the counter buzzed again. A message flashed across the screen. She tensed sharply, eyes darting toward it, and the spell broke, just enough to leave us suspended on the edge, breathless, hearts pounding, a kiss hanging in the air that had not yet landed. I hadn't expected her to speak first. The room was quiet, the rain slowing to a drizzle, the tension still clinging to us like static electricity. And then she whispered, almost too softly to hear. I saw you, the other night, at the cafe. I froze. My stomach dropped. The thought that someone had seen me, really seen me, so close to her before, brought an immediate flush of panic and something far deeper, possessiveness, longing, the ache of wanting her to notice only me. You were there? I asked, voice barely above a murmur. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer, just enough that her arm brushed mine, a contact electric enough to make me shiver. My pulse shot through my chest, rapid and uneven. I didn't mean to. I wasn't expecting it, she said finally, voice low, careful, as if admitting the truth could break something delicate. I didn't know, I whispered. My hands itched to find hers, to close the space that suddenly felt too wide. But I held back, aware of the danger lurking in our closeness. The age difference, the risks of social perception, the rules we hadn't yet dared to cross. And yet, the pull between us was stronger than my caution. Her eyes searched mine, dark and steady, and I realized that she hadn't pulled away because of judgment. She had stayed close because she wanted to know what I'd do, wanted to see if I would step forward or retreat. My chest ached with desire and fear intertwined, each pulse a reminder of how impossible this was, and yet, how irresistible. I've been thinking about you, she admitted, a tremor in her voice that she tried to hide behind a careful tilt of her chin. More than I should. My stomach tightened. My hand lifted without thinking, brushing against her arm as if to reassure her, or maybe to test if she would let me. She didn't pull away, though her breath caught slightly, and the air between us thickened with unspoken words. More than you should? I asked, stepping a fraction closer, aware of every millimeter between us. The warmth of her body, the faint scent of jasmine in her hair, the softness of her sweater against my fingers, it all hit me at once, overwhelming. She let out a soft sigh, leaning just slightly toward me. The vulnerability in her posture made my heart twist. I wanted to close the last inch, to see if we could erase the tension with one bold move. But at the same time, fear pricked at my nerves. What if someone walked in? What if we couldn't stop at one step? Her eyes met mine, steady, searching, and in that gaze I saw everything: desire, hesitation, longing, and the promise of something neither of us could deny. The air between us hummed with electricity, a silent acknowledgement that everything had changed. Then she moved her hand slightly, brushing past mine, just close enough to let me feel the heat radiating from her. It was a silent invitation, a test, a confession all at once. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering, knowing that the next moment, the next choice, would alter everything. I stepped forward, slowly, aware that this decision could either shatter or ignite the fragile, impossible connection we had built. The apartment felt smaller now, every object, every shadow pressing us closer together. I could feel her warmth through the thin fabric of her sweater, smell the faint trace of vanilla mingled with rain, hear the uneven rhythm of her breath as if it were a second heartbeat synchronized with mine. I shouldn't, she whispered, voice trembling just enough to make my pulse spike. Her eyes searched mine, wide and unguarded, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in her confidence, the longing and fear laid bare. And yet, I murmured back, leaning slightly forward, the space between us shrinking to almost nothing. My hand hovered near her waist, an ache in my chest telling me I had to reach, to bridge the distance. Her fingers twitched as if she wanted the same, but hesitation held her in place. We both knew the stakes, the age gap, the risk of misjudgment, the whisper of guilt and caution, but it didn't matter. Not tonight. Not here. The world outside could wait. I can't stop thinking about you, I confessed, voice low, raw. Each word felt like a surrender, a declaration, a thread weaving us together in the fragile tension between desire and fear. She inhaled sharply, leaning just enough that her shoulder pressed against mine. The warmth seared me, a quiet reminder that this moment was both dangerous and inevitable. Her hand brushed against mine, lingering this time, deliberate, and the spark that ignited in that instant made my head spin. I don't want to ruin this, she whispered, tilting her head toward mine, eyes shimmering with the weight of her honesty. But she trailed off, and I knew. She didn't need to finish. The silence said everything we hadn't dared to speak aloud. Slowly, impossibly, I closed the final inches between us. Our foreheads brushed, and her breath mingled with mine, soft and warm, a fragile tether holding us together. My fingers traced the line of her jaw, memorizing the curve, the strength beneath the vulnerability, the truth that had been hidden in plain sight all this time. Her lips hovered near mine, the tension unbearable. Time seemed to slow. I could feel her shiver, feel the catch of her breath against my cheek, the tremor in her fingers as they found my hand. And in that charged pause, we both made a choice. I leaned in, slowly, deliberately, letting her lead too, letting the gravity of all the nights spent watching, waiting, imagining, pull us together. And finally, our lips met, soft and unhurried, a confession that needed no words. It wasn't perfect. It was messy. Human. Electric. Everything it should be. When we pulled back just slightly, foreheads still pressed together, the storm outside mirrored the one inside us, wild, uncontainable, and utterly ours. For the first time, I saw her completely, not just the grace, the warmth, the strength, but the fear, the longing, the hidden pieces of herself she'd never shown anyone else. And she saw me, fully, quietly, the young man drawn into her orbit in ways neither of us could resist. We stayed like that for a long, trembling moment, breath mingling, hearts pounding in perfect sync. There were no words, and none were needed. We understood each other now, completely. And nothing would ever be the same again. The rain had finally slowed to a gentle drizzle, and the apartment felt softer somehow, the storm outside mirrored by the calm warmth inside. We sat side by side on the couch, shoulders brushing, fingers intertwined without thinking. There was no rush, no expectation, just the quiet hum of shared presence, the unspoken understanding that we had crossed the threshold together. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and I felt the weight of her trust settle into me. It was subtle, grounding, and more powerful than any words could express. I brushed my thumb over the back of her hand, memorizing the curve of her fingers, the warmth of her skin, the way she fit against me like she had always been meant to. I was afraid, she admitted softly, her voice almost a whisper. Afraid that people would judge. Afraid I'd lose control of myself. Afraid I'd ruin everything. I tightened my hold gently, letting her know without speaking that none of that mattered to me. We don't need anyone else to understand, I said. Not now. Not ever. All that matters is this, here with you. Her lips curved into a small, tired smile. She tilted her head, resting her forehead against mine. The contact was electric, tender, human, a quiet promise that we'd weather the fear together. My heart had never felt so full, so raw, so utterly alive. I didn't think it would feel like this, she murmured. Like finally right. Me neither, I admitted. My voice was low, reverent, carrying the weight of all the longing, hesitation, and quiet obsession that had built between us. I could feel her shiver slightly as I brushed a strand of hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear. The gesture was intimate without words, a simple acknowledgement of closeness that spoke volumes. We stayed like that for a long while, breathing in sync, savoring the warmth, the nearness, the knowledge that whatever obstacles existed outside, judgment, age, uncertainty, didn't touch the space we'd claimed for ourselves. Every fear, every moment of hesitation had led us here, and it felt like the most natural, human thing in the world. Her hand moved to rest on my chest, fingers lightly tracing the rhythm of my heartbeat. I leaned my forehead against hers again, letting her weight, her warmth, and her trust sink into me. We laughed softly at nothing, the sound blending with the patter of rain, a shared joy that had nothing to prove and everything to feel. Finally, she whispered, "Stay." I did. I didn't need to think about it. I just did. The space between us vanished completely, a long hug, gentle but unbreakable, our fingers entwined, foreheads pressed together. And in that embrace, all the doubts, all the hesitation, all the age gap worries dissolved. We had found something real, messy, human, and utterly ours. The rain outside had faded completely, leaving only a calm quiet. We remained together, side by side, breathing and laughing and savoring the intimacy we had finally allowed ourselves to claim. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?